A 2022 lawsuit against the Biden administration filed by attorneys general in Louisiana, Missouri have discovered what has been called the largest speech censorship operation in recent history. Now, we shouldn't be surprised what this administration would do, but they've done it. Now, what was revealed in the blistering testimony before the House Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the federal government last week is chilling. Now, this was by plaintiffs in the case. Now that the censorship that many suspected has in fact been verified, how should Congress, as well as ordinary Americans, respond? Well, join me now by phone to discuss this. Senator Eric Schmitt. He serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and the Joint Economic Committee. He represents the state of Missouri, where he was previously the state attorney general and worked with Jeff Landry of Louisiana to advance this case. Senator Schmitt, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be with you.
Senator, before we get into your testimony last week before the Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the federal government, you serve on the House Armed Service or the Senate Armed Services Committee. Today, the Biden administration releasing their review of the debacle called the Afghanistan withdrawal. Your thoughts on that report?
I mean, this administration refuses to take responsibility. I mean, I think in the press conference today, they actually said this isn't about accountability. Well, that's actually what this should be about. Servicemen, lost their lives, including, one from Missouri. $80 billion worth of equipment was left behind. And it really signaled a weakness from this administration, and the world is watching, of course. And then you add that on top of what happened with the Chinese spy balloon. And, they were not only gaining critical intelligence. A report just came out, as we suspected, they were getting intelligence as it came across the continental United States, including Whiteman Air Force Base, home of the B-2 bomber in Missouri, in my home state, and gaining critical intelligence on Joe Biden, how he would react to this, what he would do. And he failed miserably on that front, too. So, again, I just think it's a scary time for the country right now with Joe Biden in charge, because he exudes weakness and lack of smart decisions. And there's no way to sugarcoat that. And so regardless of what their PR spin is with this or what it was with the Chinese spy balloon, it's very clear to, I think, anybody that's watching that this administration's been incompetent.
Yes. And by the way, Senator, I know you're on the phone because you're out across the state. Your state been hit hard by the recent tornadoes that have come through. And I just want you to know our viewers and listeners praying for the folks in Missouri and elsewhere, the other dozen states or so that have been hit hard by this. We've had Samaritan's Purse have been on the program discussing their response and relief efforts. And so I just want you to know that there's a lot of folks standing with the folks in your state that have been hit by this. I want to move to your testimony.
We really do.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those areas where it's not just the government that responds. I think when you have these humanitarian, non-governmental organizations like Samaritan's Purse and others that are out there helping, it makes a huge difference. And so we need to continue to protect the ability of people of faith to be able to live out their faith, because it has implications in so many different aspects of life.
There's no doubt about
Let's
that.
move.
And I know some people try to. Thank you. Some people try to undermine that, but prayer helps, and people being lifted up in prayer, people feel that. I can tell you the folks I was talking to today, they feel those prayers, and we certainly appreciate the sense of community that people of faith bring to situations like this. Yeah.
Last week, your testimony before the House Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the federal government was shocking, quite frankly. I mean, it wasn't possibly, it could have been. It was definitive in your declaration of what you have found that the administration has been engaged in. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so about a year ago, Tony, Missouri, when I was Attorney General, we, along with Louisiana, filed a landmark lawsuit alleging and then demonstrating through the evidence that's been uncovered through our discovery that the administration, the federal government, engaged in a vast censorship enterprise colluding, cajoling, pressuring, and big tech willingly went along with this. And these are some of the biggest companies in the history of the world to suppress the speech of millions of Americans. And it took various different forms. You take, for example, COVID. We took the deposition of Anthony Fauci, and it was very clear that when he spoke, big tech censored. He was very aware of the funding that he's in charge of that went to the Wuhan lab, and went immediately to try to dismiss anybody who suggested that the coronavirus came from the Wuhan lab. And of course, that is the most plausible theory. That's been demonstrated over and over now. But it was really his attempt to cover his tracks. He worked directly with social media companies to cast anybody who said that as a conspiracy theorist, and including medical doctors, by the way, who were being threatened with losing their license if they talked about these things. Interestingly enough, it's sad. It's funny, but it's sad. During the course of that deposition, he actually asked a court reporter who sneezed to wear a mask. I mean, this is in fall of 2022. This is the person who's in charge of this. It really goes to sort of who this guy was. He said, I don't recall, 174 times. I don't remember. Add on that over 200 times. So the guy who claimed he was the science and knew everything blanked on a lot of important things. But we did pin him down on, for example, an email comes across from a friend of his saying, this is in early 2020, hey, I'm getting on a plane, should I wear a mask? And he dismisses that by saying masks are ineffective. Then, of course, he turns around, and we have 5-year-olds being forced to wear masks.
Dr. Science, Mr. Fauci, giving kind of duplicitous answers regarding masks, making our 5-year-olds wear them, but others, he's saying that's ineffective. So what else did you discover in this process?
Well, we also discovered that, take, for example, the Hunter Biden laptop story, which the FBI had the laptop in December of 2019. And in 2020, leading up to the presidential election, the FBI had monthly and weekly meetings with big tech companies. And they warned of a Russian, quote unquote, Russian hack and leak operation. And one of the Twitter executives said they specifically mentioned the Hunter Biden laptop story, which they knew was actually a thing. They knew the laptop existed. This wasn't a fake story, and really kind of laid the groundwork for the censorship that followed. They had big tech companies with the government had weekly censorship meetings. They had a special portal. The Surgeon General of the United States was texting a senior Facebook official asking and, demanding things be taken down. And then the response was, okay, took it down. What else can we do? This kind of coordination, I think it's important for people to understand. The federal government can't censor speech. That, of course, violates the First Amendment. They also can't outsource that censorship to third parties, which is exactly what they were doing here. And that's when we talk about this vast censorship enterprise. Think about it. The federal government, with its vast power and authority, colluding with some of the biggest companies in the history of the world, ought to scare everybody in this country, regardless of what your political affiliation. It's a dangerous, very road to go down. We saw it. We've exposed it. The Twitter files, of course, have amplified that, and we got to make sure this never happens again.
All right. So just to be clear, the FBI had the Hunter Biden laptop, but they were telling social media, hey, shut down this because it's a part of Russian disinformation. So they were lying.
That's correct. And
is there something that's criminal, isn't it?
Well, look, here's the thing. The FBI has no business in being involved with elections like that, especially in the sense that they had the laptop. And
right.
This, who knows what people would have done with it. I think, the point of all of this is, whether it's information about masks, whether it's information about vaccines, whether it's information about the origins of COVID, whether it's information about the Hunter Biden laptop story, whatever that is, the people in this country get to decide how they weigh that versus other information and how they make their decisions, whether it's, wearing a mask or not, or getting the vaccine or not, or how they're going to vote. The government should not be making these decisions about what people can hear. And that's exactly what was happening, which is why this case, that lawsuit, is the most important, civil liberties, free speech case we've had in generations. Because what happened, Tony, typically in these cases, somebody would sue the big tech companies, and it would go to the Northern District of California, in a liberal jurisdiction, and never to be seen again. We took a different approach. We sued the federal government. And so it wasn't a private company. We were suing the federal government for actual censorship. And this discovery that's come up, out, of course, is these are bombshell revelations. And then, Representative Jordan, Chairman Jordan of that Weaponization Subcommittee, they're continuing to do this work. They're digging in deeper.
Yeah.
And, for me as a senator now, we just have to fundamentally dismantle the administrative state. It is not about self-government. The idea of with a senator, you can vote for me, you can vote against me, you can send me back, send me home. You're accountable. The deputy undersecretary of XYZ or whoever's not accountable to anybody, and we got to change that dynamic.
Yeah, and I think it's going to require another election in order to get that corrected, because you're going to have people that run on correcting this corrupt system, as well as using the courts to the degree we can.
That's right. And think about it. They were trying to stand up an actual disinformation governance board. I mean, this was a thing. Remember, that what's her name?
Yeah.
Mary Poppins or whatever. She was going to be the leader of the Ministry of Truth, this Orwellian. I mean, they were not even trying to hide this. So, again, this is, I think, people have to stand up and understand this is antithetical to who we are as a country. The First Amendment gives us a right, to worship how we want to worship and say the things we want to say. In many ways, Tony, it's this great pressure release valve because there are, people from different backgrounds and have different views. In this country, we resolve those disputes through persuasion, through elections, not through violence. And you have to have
historically.
That. But when you cut off dissent, historically, and America is unique. That's what we mean by American exceptionalism. We're the exception to the rule because in most places around the world, that still exists. And we don't want to be like everybody else. We want to continue to be, the greatest country in the history of the world. And this is a big piece of it.
Yes, if this goes unchallenged and unchanged, that history will be fundamentally changed in terms of what we look like in the future. Senator Schmitt, I want to thank you for joining us today. I appreciate your work on this and look forward to talking with you about it more.